Again. It's been a long time.
It has, yes. Wow.
Yeah.
How long has it been? What, 3 years?
Something on that level. Yeah, I'd say 2 or 3 years at least.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just check. I am recording this call, if that's okay.
That's fine by me. Yeah.
Let me just try and find recording software and see if I can check that it is doing that. Yes, it is. Okay, that's wonderful. Right. How are you?
I'm good. Busy. Crazy, crazy, crazy nowadays. I mentioned in my email, I think that we had a new baby just 2 months ago. So it's been quite a ride since then. It's been a very interesting
I
summer.
bet. Wow.
But yeah, he's really actually a joy, just a handful. How about
As
you?
you know, yeah, crazy busy at the moment. I'm really getting involved in a lot of things. There's a big arms fair, one of the world's biggest arms fair, just down the road from here. So we're kind of getting involved in
Hmm.
talking to people about that and raising awareness about it. Countries like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia are there buying armaments,
Oh.
which we're a little bit upset about. I'm sure you probably understand that.
Where are you located again?
London.
London. So this is happening right in London?
Right on the doorstep. It's the world's
Wow.
biggest arm fair. Yeah, it's well. I mean, as you may know, the UK is one of the biggest arm. I think it might be the biggest arms sales.
I
Uh,
did not know that. I always
yeah,
assumed it was I mean, I always assume it's America, but that's
yeah.
interesting.
We're beating you this time. We're right, just one
Congratulations.
step ahead of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah. We're not so happy about it, but yeah, we're trying to advertise it and get people involved. But yeah, obviously there are other problems in this country
Mhm.
that are taking up people's time at the moment. Anyway, I mean, you are very busy, so let's jump in. About how much
Sure.
time do you think? About half an hour?
Half an hour works. Yeah, I can definitely do half an hour.
Okay, right. Well, let's try and get through the enormous number of questions that I have. Um, this is for presentation to ethical consumer organisations. So this will be your audience. Ethical consumer organisations like Good Guide, who you undoubtedly
Okay.
know of, like Ethical Consumer in the UK, and NGOs. So people who really kind of know about ethical consumption and to some degree what's going on already. And I'd like to ask you kind of the sorts of things that you feel that Phospho differentiates itself from other ethical consumption systems, and what sort of characteristics you'd like to mention to people.
Well, Ansley, actually, before we dive into the questions, maybe I should give you an update on our broader status because I
Mm,
think that's going to affect the course of the interview and maybe the questions that you have to ask.
right.
And it's fine to keep recording for this too, but it was probably important you understand that FOSSO actually is really struggling right now. We are at the moment unfunded, so I'm no longer working full time as the executive director. I've got another full time job. My role at FOSSO has been vastly scaled back just to part time work,
Mm,
and at this point, it's the future is quite unclear. And if you look at our website, you'll see we haven't had any major updates in the last few months because of the transitions that we've been going through this summer. But you know, the plan right now is to see. I'm taking a web development class to see if I can gain some web development skills myself, because that traditionally has been for FOSFA, it's been one of our biggest stumbling blocks. Having adequate web capacity to respond and develop and invigorate our community. And after spending a long time organizing volunteers and then trying to raise funds for web development, I'm finally realizing I might just try to take some classes myself and see what I can do on my own, which is, for me, a really exciting but quite an ambitious challenge at the same time. So I wanted to frame the conversation around that, in that, at this point, we're quite different than we were a couple years ago. We're sort of in a holding pattern until I can determine whether or not I can learn enough web development to make a difference and continue to implement the code. And if not, I'm not really sure what the next steps would be, but I don't, we'd probably pass on the information to someone else, or look for a way to spin it off. So I wanted
sure.
to start by that because I think, I wanted to have a chance to catch up with you, but I'm sure, in terms of how you present this to the broader group, it's a little bit delicate. We're sort of in an unusual spot right now.
Indeed, you're not in a spot that is uncommon. Certainly.
Right. In our field, a lot of us are in this boat. That's true.
Indeed, and that's very much due to the fact that developing a business model around ethical consumption is problematic, or at least has been for a lot of companies up until now. It's not super relevant, the situation you're in, because it's really your opinions that we're after on various aspects, like crowdsourcing, like collaboration, possibilities on an international basis, that sort of thing. And obviously you've worked and thought a lot in the area, so it's all still very much valuable stuff. So what are your thoughts on data collection from your experience, how crowdsourcing might play a role in that? And indeed, what elements could be collaborated upon, if any?
Well, I remain a passionate believer in the potential for crowdsourcing data for ethical consumption. For me, in part of our operating model and theory of change for Phospho from way back in the beginning when we were originally called Citizens Market, our thinking on this was that this field definitely needs expert-driven models, without a doubt. So organizations like Good Guide or the models that we see from socially responsible investing, where you have paid analysts and experts who do research, I think absolutely is necessary for this field. Those are required for good benchmarking, for strong analysis on the largest companies. So I wholeheartedly support those models. But at the same time, it's through just natural capacity constraints, it's always going to be very, very difficult for those organizations to expand beyond the largest brands. Simply because once you try to pay analysts to cover medium-sized companies or even local brands, you quickly get overwhelmed by the number of companies and number of brands you need to cover. So for that reason, I think crowdsourcing must be explored because it offers the potential key to unlock data and information at the medium and local level, which I think consumers really crave and are interested in obtaining. So in my mind, it's a question of not if, but of how. How do we gather that data? So I'll stop there and see if does that make sense so far. And I'm happy.
Very interesting. Yeah, I see your logic there. Do you see, you've talked about crowdsourcing as a way of collecting data. Do you see any potential in crowdsourcing as a marketing vehicle?
Marketing meaning as a revenue driver for the organization?
No, as in encouraging people to progressively get involved, as in the people who are providing the data becoming addicted to it because they feel a sense of ownership of the system, constantly trying to tell their friends because they feel that it's their input to the system that is making it special.
Well, yeah, I think crowdsourcing has the potential for it's sort of a word of mouth. It ties to word of mouth marketing in effect. So if you have people who are talking about a local company and talking about its social and environmental practices, they have a stake in that company's success, especially if they have positive reviews to say. And if I understand your question correctly, from a sense of marketing for the companies themselves. We've actually been very interested in the potential for collaborations here. We have to be careful because we have to maintain independence and integrity in how we collect the data. But it's really a natural alliance. When we go out and talk to local companies about our model and our interest in collecting crowdsourced reviews, and we pitch it really as a natural alliance because we want to approach the local companies that are already doing great stuff on social and environmental behavior. They certainly want to find innovative ways to reach out and expand their customer base. Often their social and environmental behavior is for them a competitive advantage, but it's just a question of how do they build buzz. So there's a lot of, I think, potential mutual value there between a model like Phospho and companies that are looking to build some buzz around their behavior. You'll
have to excuse me. I've only just got back. Could you explain to me exactly, because this idea of engaging with local companies, do you mean small local independent traders as well? So,
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, right.
And I mean, that's one of the things that's unique about our model. It's very challenging
yeah.
too, is that we allow anybody to come to our site and rate any company at all. You can add a new company right now. So you could come to our site right now, and if you have a local shoe store or a local coffee shop that you're excited about, maybe the coffee shop sells organic coffee, or the shoe store has responsible sourcing practices. You could go right to the site right now, add the name of that company, and then write a review about it. Now, the advantage of that is that it allows us to start attracting local reviews. The challenge that we're running into is how do we manage that effectively on two levels. One, how do we try to guide reviews so that we don't just have a smattering of solo reviews for one company, but actually get some critical mass around that? And that's a big challenge that we're looking at. And secondly, how do we handle the issue of a solo practitioner who wants to talk about their own company? We need to do a better job, I think, within FOSFO of setting some norms and standards that we don't want this to be a platform for people to advertise their own company, but we do want it to be a platform for people to talk about companies that they know.
Sure. I've seen various approaches to collecting this data. So one would be this very quantitative method. So you look at third-party companies that rate companies. So I mean, you've got some companies in America that collect data on political donations to parties and then give you a numerical ranking according to those companies. You've got ethical consumer organizations that really just compile third-party journalism and score it. And you've also got ethical consumer organizations which allow people to really just put in what they think about stuff. So these various sorts of data can be brought together. You're really talking about people coming along and just reviewing how they feel about something. Do you combine it with any of the other two models, like third-party quantitative analysis?
Great question. Great question. Right now, the model is only in that one category of user-driven reviews. But from early on in our business model, we've been thinking we'd really like to combine it with. So we call the user-driven reviews. We call that our review model. The idea that very much like Yelp, people can come to our site, write a review, share an opinion about a company's behavior. But from the very beginning, we've designed it, but we haven't had the capacity or the resources to launch this yet. We've always wanted to combine this with a data model, which is combining and collecting third-party credible sources, because as you point out, there's a swath of publicly available, very reputable third-party data out there on a whole range of issues. Almost any social or environmental issue you look at, if you Google it and look around, you'll eventually find probably some nonprofit or some organization out there that rates companies on that particular issue, and that's usually public data. So we've been very interested in combining that data together into a simple data set that consumers can access. And the real value there is that we could very quickly have scores on and reputable scores on a whole range of companies on a whole range of issues. So that's something that's in the works. But as I mentioned earlier, we're struggling with some web capacity, so it's not clear yet when we'll be able to launch it.
I mean, one of the things that helps my projects forward, of course, is actually that I'm a programmer. So I can really push those things forward very quickly. Let's pop over to collaboration for a bit. The conference at the end of the month is a large portion of it is about whether or not, or indeed what parts can be collaborated on. And there have been various views on this already, but do you think any of the work that you are doing, that other organizations are doing, from the raw data, from the third-party data, all the way up to the actual kind of opinionated scoring, if I can call it opinionated, obviously it is with the qualitative data to a large degree. Do you think any of that can be collaborated upon? And indeed, maybe even the web platforms can be shared in some way. I mean, what parts can we collaborate on?
I think that is a great question. I also think it's a really interesting question, because in my mind, there's tremendous potential for collaboration, but there are also very real challenges associated with collaboration. We've been thinking about collaboration and potential mergers, again, from the very beginning, because we've got this new space of different organizations doing sort of obviously complementary things, but the devil's in the details about how you bring them together.
Absolutely.
So I think on there's a couple of different levels that we've been thinking about. On one example, as I mentioned, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations, and not just nonprofit, but some for-profit analysts too. A lot of organizations out there that specialize on particular issues, and they have a high degree of expertise on a particular issue, like you mentioned with lobbying, for example. Very good,
yes,
solid research data. Often it's just raw data. It's not really interpreted. It's just putting the data out there and making it available. And I think it's important for us as we think about this data model, for example, and I think this applies to any organization that's looking at sharing or using third-party data. It's great to be able to use that public data, but it's also really important to find ways to collaborate with that source so that the source is supported and recognized. If we end up with just simple scraping spiders that go out there and bring all the data in, well, that might be nice in the near term, but ultimately you're not cultivating and nurturing the core sources that you're using. And so we haven't figured that out yet. But for us, it's really important that we find ways to drive publicity or recognition and potentially even funding back to the original sources. For example, it might be possible to have a system where, let's say we're collecting different third-party sources and, in our crowdsource mentality, enabling our crowd to rate those different sources in terms of credibility. And then finding ways for our crowd to drive publicity or web traffic or potentially even funding to the most credible, the most highly rated sources. So that's one level of collaboration that we have thought about, but we certainly haven't. It doesn't have legs yet. It's one of those chicken egg questions where you need to have a solid data, a lot of traffic before you can start attracting the attention of those third-party sources. That's one element. The other element I think is really critical here is cross-pollination between the groups that are doing thorough analysis, such as Good Guide, for example, and the groups that are focused more exclusively on crowdsourcing. And because in theory, there's nothing that would prevent one organization from doing both under its own house, both the crowdsourcing elements and the expert research. And I think one day we might see a thriving crowdsourced community housed within one site that also has a very strong research arm that's doing the third-party research. But in practice and in culture, I think that may be difficult to do within one organization because the cultures are so different. The very culture of research and academic expertise often bumps up and is in tension with the culture of crowdsourcing and the design and the mentality that you need to enable a community there. So I'm not saying that's impossible, but I think you've got some cultural tensions there. And for that reason, if it doesn't seem to be evolving organically within one organization, I would say we need to find ways to cross-post scores or compare scores where, it would be great to say, on FOSFO's site, for example, here's what the crowd's saying, but also, by the way, here's what Good Guide or here's what the experts are saying about this too, so that consumers can see and compare those scores. And I know examples like CNET, for example, that do tech research. You can see, consumers, I think, tend to want to see what the editorial board is saying as well as what the crowd is saying. And they often want to just be able to compare the two together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you really touched on an incredibly important point that affects the development of these projects so fundamentally, is that's the people that are doing it and the cultures within the organizations have an enormous effect on what they can do. And I think crowdsourcing is an enormous challenge to someone who regards themselves as an expert. I think it's because it turns the whole thing upside down and redefines who we are, really. Exactly. And so, yeah, it's a big cultural leap for any organization to make. Interestingly enough, obviously we've been interviewing quite a few organizations. Everyone is, what's the word? Playing slightly with the idea of crowdsourcing,
They should.
teasing it a little bit and, poking it, seeing what happens, which of course, when you take that attitude towards crowdsourcing, it's maybe not as successful as it would be if you really kind of attempted to understand the cultural shift necessary to make it really successful. So you're absolutely right. Interestingly, Good Guide are now accepting crowdsourced evidence to complement some of their scores, and that's something they're looking into. I had a chat with Bill Pease, actually, at Good Guide, and he was really interested in the crowdsourcing thing, and he was talking about it from a marketing point of view. So if someone puts their information into something, the feeling of ownership, they get over that. And what I suppose the crux of one of the questions I want to ask is, if someone feels that way, do they start talking to other people they know who aren't ethical consumers and trying to turn them into ethical consumers so that they will use the system that they've been contributing to because they feel such a sense of ownership of it? That's a
great question too. And to be frank, I don't have the answer to that, because
neither do I.
our community is still very nascent, so we don't have, I think, enough data to draw strong conclusions. So I can give qualitative insights, but I think our community and our traffic would need to be a lot bigger before I could really start answering this definitively. But certainly that is a key appeal about a crowdsourcing model, is that for example, this is an example of a feature we can't wait to get up and live on our site, is that an ability to share. So you want to write a review about a company, an ability to quickly share that review on Facebook or on Twitter or through your other networks, so that does all kinds of things. It drives people to your site. It builds buzz around your organization, but it also builds buzz about the particular brands and companies that you're covering. So this ability to share what you're doing, I think, is an absolutely core feature. And I regret we don't have it yet on our site, because it's something long-standing that we've been wanting to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose I take the view that there is a subset of ethical consumers out there, and as organizations we not only need to make a system for them, but we need to make more of them as well.
right
And spread it, because there possibly aren't even enough to really cause the sort of radical change that I certainly would like to see. I mean, you've touched on this idea of, which is very particular to Phosphor, of the actual local independent companies being involved in this, and I really like that. Are there any other characteristics that you haven't mentioned about Phosphor that should be talked about?
Well, I think along those lines, I mean, our key distinction, and I don't think we're entirely unique. I know there are some other organizations that have tried this in the past, that starting from a crowdsourced mentality. So I don't want to pretend we're the only one to be doing this. And in fact, I'm glad there are a couple out there. There are a few out there that are doing this, because I think this is such an open space. There's so much room for error, and it's good to have experimenting models. But for us, I think our key differentiator is our core emphasis on crowdsourcing. And and what comes from that is this emphasis on engaging local companies. But in conjunction with that is an emphasis on community building. And again, this is something that we're still trying to figure out, so I can't pretend that we've cracked the code. But one of the things that we've done to help build our community so far is get it offline. There's a potential trap where, and this is a big debate among folks in new media, whether or not community building can be done exclusively online, or whether there really needs to be an offline element to drive that community building. And I'm still not sure about the answer, but we've been trying to experiment with both sides. So, in the beginning, we launched our site. We did a lot of online outreach, and we quickly realized that wasn't going to really go anywhere unless we started trying to build a core community offline. And so we've been doing things like events where we go out and invite people to come together and do a game simulation that simulates the game mechanics of the site, but in a way where they can interact face-to-face and talk about company behavior, compete in a game, something like where they write reviews and shoot baskets for prizes. And the point here is that to build a thriving community, I think the offline elements can't be ignored. They really need to be examined. On the other hand, it's very time consuming and resource intensive to go out and engage volunteers, have events, host people together. And it's so much more efficient to try to do things online through online vehicles like Google AdWords and Facebook and Twitter. So to be perfectly frank, a potential differentiator for us is the community building side of it as a nonprofit, an emphasis on that. But I don't have evidence yet that has worked successfully, and so it's something that I'm experimenting with. But I'm also interested in going back to online strategies as well. So that's a sort of a long and I know a cagey answer, but the point here is that if you're going to be doing community building, I think community builders should be examining both the offline and online elements because there's an interesting debate there. What's not quite clear to me yet is whether these need to be done in tandem or whether online strategies can be pursued exclusively.
I have been asking myself exactly the same questions, and we have been discussing them at length. And we're still very much in experimental understanding of those questions. I think they are so key, though, really so key. And of course, the great advantage of local community and local buying is that it is in itself usually much more ethical, certainly in terms of the environment, to source things locally. So there's lots of sorts of interesting questions around that. We've set up some local ethical consumption projects that are quite an advanced phase, don't have too many users, but we're really trying to answer those questions. So I will probably talk to you more about that. It's beyond the scope of this discussion maybe, but I'll talk to you more about that after this discussion. Yeah.
I think to just piggyback on that point, I think that's so important what you just mentioned about the fact that the consumers, the core base, the people who are already thinking about ethical consumption, because that's where we have to start, right? We're not going to be able to start just by
absolutely
a whole bunch of mainstream. Naturally, we're going to start with our natural target base, the natural market there. Focus on that core base and just be careful not to lock into a niche, but always be thinking about how do we expand this beyond that niche in the long term. But with that core base, these kind of folks are already thinking about buying local. For them, very often that is a big factor. And so, it's some kind of database that only tells them about the large, big multinational brands only has limited value, right? And so, I think this is sort of an obvious point, but it is it's a really important point about why it's so important to get out and figure out how to engage the local companies, because I think that's really going to make the ethical consumers get very excited about using models like these.
Absolutely. An enormous challenge, as you say,
yes.
to combine all of that and more, probably, because there are so many different things to put into there, to this system that helps people manage their lives in an ethical way. Okay. Well, I've asked everything I think I want to ask for the conference. Do you have any closing remarks?
No closing. Well, I guess I'll start with the closing remark, and I'd like to ask you a couple quick questions.
Go for it. Okay.
But in terms of my remarks, I'd say that we're in FOSSO's in a tough spot right now. Our future is uncertain. We're as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be experimenting with sort of scaling back our resources and staff substantially, and seeing if we can do this on a more under a tight ship, I should say. So we're still here, and we're still. My main point is that I'm really delighted to talk to folks. I think part of this, whether or not FOSSO is able to succeed in the long run, what's really important here is that we're part of a broader community of practitioners who are experimenting in this area. And when we were getting this off the ground, it was so helpful to be able to talk to others who had come before us, been trying different things, learn from that. This is a field where there's going to be a lot of mistakes made because it's so new and it's so big and so challenging. So it's really important that we keep talking to each other and sharing our insights. So I want to just say that I'm always happy to talk, share what we've learned, what's worked well and what hasn't, as we continue to scramble and see what we can do with our site. Well, that's that. I'd love to hear a little bit more what you're up to, though, Ansley, about just in terms of the conference coming up and in terms of your projects. I mean, if you could give me a quick overview about where things stand on your end, I'd love to hear it.
Well, we've been working on 9carrots.org, which to some degree is kind of what we've just talked about. We really started thinking about local community and people buying locally, and supporting the local economy and talking to each other physically, and so we came up with 9carrots, which is, as you might imagine, a map. You go to your local community, you can see all the local businesses on there, and the interaction between them is that the businesses can, through the map, talk to the community about the things that they're doing that the community cares about. So at the moment, it focuses on the environment. A business might be saving up to change its lighting to be low energy, and so that is advertised on the site. The consumers then see that, the ones that care about the environment, so they go and shop there to help them build up the money to change the lighting.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's a great. I mean, that's a great. I love that angle for local engagement because it combines the sort of capital interests of these small companies that are trying to do a project with the collaborative and support of the collaboration and support of the community.
Absolutely.
Do you know Mike at So Change up in Boston by any chance?
Mike,
SoChange.com.
Is that SO Change?
SoChange.com. You should definitely check him out.
Okay.
I haven't talked to him in a couple of months, but he's got a great model going, and you should. I think you'd be really interested in checking it out. I'd be happy to put you in touch if it's of interest, because he's working on something where consumers can online put funds into a pot for local companies that are working on a project like this. Let's say you have a local company that wants to invest a couple $1,000s in converting to compact fluorescent lighting, for example. It's a mechanism for local consumers to rally and support that company in launching that project. And there's a couple other interesting, I think, really interesting twists that he's got going on. But
that sounds very interesting.
Check it out.
But we really like this idea of local community. So we've been concentrating on that. As always, positive with it, trying to help these companies that have positive angles on how they do business. We've been trying to get that going on a shoestring, and it's very difficult.
It's
the nature of the business, yeah. So we do have some hopes with that one. What else have we been up to? I mean, we really put Easy Ethical offline to concentrate on the 9carrots local community thing. The reason we put Easy Ethical offline was because it was supposed to be the 100% crowdsourced thing. You go there, you add Nike as a company, you start linking to third-party journalism, and you start rating it. That was the model. It was all crowdsourced. There was, it was all coming in like that. And we designed it in a very geeky sort of information-based way, and it was terrible. It really was. So, we've learned so much over the last 3 years that you have to start really thinking about what it is that people want who might be using the system and trying to tap into that. And I think local community is interesting because actually people do like to meet each other. And if you can put a social aspect to these things, then you're really onto a winner. You have to appeal to fraternity. You have to appeal to a sense of ownership. You have to put gaming mechanisms in there. If you don't, unless it just won't spread. It just won't be used, and it might be used once, but it won't be used again. Unless it's an absolutely mind-bogglingly fantastic model that just doesn't need anything added to it to just work. But so we've been thinking about all these things.
By the way, that's an interesting insight, because I think for tools like the ones we've been experimenting with, there are maybe a couple core ways to find that instant utility, instant value for the consumer. I mean, one route is to do that sort of data mode and say, I'm going to go out there and scrape a whole lot of data and instantly get you enough information that you'll feel like the core data here is useful. Whereas for Fossil, it's been a big challenge. It's largely an empty nest, and so people come to the site and they think, well, there's a smattering here and there, but I'm not really going to get engaged until I see a depth of at least 20, 30, 50 reviews on any one company, right? So you've got this chicken egg question. One way out of that is to say, well, let's start by launching something like a data model where we scrape a lot of data from the big brands at least so that you can start there, right? But another angle is to go with a more playful social side and find something that, even if it's not the data right off the bat that's useful, there's something else social that's keeping people interested in coming back. And maybe it's a combination of both. But you're right. It just starting with a platform where people can share is in of itself, I don't think, going to be a big driver, and that's certainly been our experience.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we are experimenting with, learning about. I mean, there have been. We learned so much from putting these projects out there. There's already been a gaming aspect to 9 Carrots. It was a hilarious one. When someone goes in to support one of these businesses, they say, okay, I've actually come here to shop here because you're changing your lighting and it's to support you. And at that point, the business puts 10% of the sale towards the project. Mm. That's the deal, you see. But the business also hands out a 9 Carrots receipt to the customer. And that's how... So we track all the transactions. So we don't trust the business. We track the transactions so we know when they've hit their target and when they need to do the installation. These receipts all have a unique code on.
Oh, okay.
So, and it came from a Berkeley database of the English language. And so I printed out all these receipts. It was a very long job, straight from this Berkeley database. And so they all had individual words on for the consumer to register the receipt, so we knew where they'd shopped and stuff. But I didn't filter the database. Mm-hmm. So it had all of the profanities on there as well. So the consumer would receive one of these special receipts, you've just spent £10 to support blah, and it would have paedophile 2 written on it, or buggery 17 or something like that. And
right.
And so what we noticed, that they actually started playing a game. They'd go to a bar, buy a pint, get a receipt, and then come back and see. And because all of the colloquial language was in there as well, so actually it was quite often funny. Mm-hmm. And so they'd be constantly getting drunker and drunker, comparing all these silly words. And we didn't know that would happen, but if that sort of gaming can be built into stuff, I think it can be quite a driver.
That can be a great viral driver. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
it's almost like a scavenger hunt in a way, going around looking for these birds. I love it.
The other thing we've just launched, is that if you give someone else your receipt, when they register that receipt themselves for the second time, it links you to them. So if you introduce someone to ethical consumption, there is suddenly a way of you being able to measure how much the effect of you introducing people is having, because it knows that you introduced them. So if they then go and support several shops and spend a lot of money, when you look at your profile, you can see all the good that they're doing on your profile because it links you to them. So
I love that. What you're really doing there is empowering your mavens with feedback on how they're doing.
Absolutely,
and that's a great idea.
Incentives for them to spread the idea, incentives for them to play games and do it again and again, and trying to set up a culture. And I mean, this is all in its infancy, and I'm racking my brains about how to do this with wider ethical consumption projects and introduce all this gaming and all these incentives to introduce people. And I think it's really missing from a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff, Ansley. I love to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously both innovating and really going very much down the same road with all these sorts of questions. You've really asked a lot of the questions that we are asking as well. Anyway, 40 minutes. We're going to post this up online at jonathanmelliwish.com,
great,
where they were last time. And we will post the other. I mean, there's 4 up there already, I think. Good Guide and various others. I'm interviewing more next week, so you're welcome to have a look at them. We're going to put executive summaries of them. I've already invited you to edit our talk that we're going to give at the end of the month. I sent you an email. Obviously, we're crowdsourcing the talk that we're going to do on crowdsourcing, purely for ironic reasons. So you're welcome to put stuff in there if you'd like us to say things, and we'll let you know. We'll send you an MP3 of what happens at the conference and things like that.
Well, Ansley, you and Jonathan, I think, stand out in this field as conveners. From the very beginning, I was, you've probably, I'm sure you've heard this from other people, but there's a lot of bilateral conversations between these practitioners. We say, oh, we have all these great ideas. It's so tough to collaborate. At the very least, it's so hard for us just to exchange our lessons learned. And wouldn't it be great if there was somebody out there who were bringing us together? And no one ever seems to have the time or the incentives to do so. And I am just so appreciative and so impressed at you both for kicking off the convening aspect of this field and keeping it going. It's extraordinary, and I think we all owe you a huge debt for this work. It's really extraordinary. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the compliment. That's wonderful. And we should definitely keep in touch because we think so very alike on these things.
All right, we'll keep in touch then.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.